there were some reports about the BDS movement within Israel. Also, there were a lot of people coming out on the street and they're protesting against the Israeli violence against the Palestine. There's some support. I heard of some movements within Israel, and that's one thing. Another thing is also you had mentioned about the younger generation in Western countries. They're more secular and standing up for committed to the rights of Palestinians. So recently also there was especially in the United States, there were a lot of reports about the protest against Netanyahu's visit to the US and BDS measures. So I would like some information about this. Thank you.
We'll take a couple of more and we'll get the answers from Achin sir. There, over there. Rajesh.
Thank you, Professor, for that very enriching lecture on the history of the dispute. My question is specific. It has to do with identity. That how do you look at lapse and convergence?
So what kind of conversion?
Look at the, memory and remembrance in construction of an identity, and it has to do with both Israeli identity and Palestinian identity, which is what is the plane on which they converge, which is collective memory, history, and remembrance in construction of an identity.
Any more questions? Yeah.
Sir, thank you so much for this very important talk and for breaking down the whole Israel-Palestine genocide going on. I did want to ask about BDS, since you spoke about things we can do it to be in solidarity. I don't think it should be just upon the Palestinians in the diaspora to do something about it. I think all of us can do a lot by following the BDS movement. And I would like to know your opinion on the BDS movement as well, and how it can be a very important tool in dismantling settler colonialism. But I also want to talk about another thing that me and my friends have been doing to support people in Gaza. We have been in touch with families from ground in Gaza, and we're supporting them. We're arranging funds for them so that they can get access to daily essentials. The situation's pretty bad. Just last night, Israel has been carpet bombing northern Gaza for over 15 hours straight, and the videos coming out are, I have no words for it, but I do want to read out Yasmin's message that she sent me last night, who's a mother in Gaza. She says, "They are hitting and bombing us from all directions. Please pray for us. It is continuous and very close to me. I'm in the dark room and I cannot see. This is very frightening. Please pray for us. May Allah save us." You know, we keep getting all these messages from families in Gaza and we feel so helpless, but there is a lot we can do. And if you would like to make contributions to support people in Gaza, get access to daily essentials, you can get in touch with me. I will leave my contact with the organizer, and you can also, we verified these fundraisers. If you have any questions about the legitimacy as well, yeah, I'm happy to clarify that. But yeah, we really need your support right now, and these funds will also help them evacuate whenever the borders open.
Yeah, thank you. You want to take one more question, sir? Or? So I have one from the audience, Achin sir.
One more.
Yeah, I have one. We'll come to you. 1 second. I will come to you. So the question is there any chance of Arab world coming together against Israel? Yeah, your question, please.
Yeah. Hello, sir. Session, as always. Sir, I just wanted to know, as you had mentioned on...
Can you please stand if you don't mind?
Yeah, sure. Sir, I just wanted to, as you had mentioned earlier, you said we'll talk about the USSR Israel connection and how the Indian left was had no word regarding Nehru's thing with Israel. So if you could explain or shed some light on that as well, could be better. Thank you.
You will take.
That's fine. Should I take?
Yeah, sure, please. Yeah,
Oh, I can do it from here.
yeah. You can take from there. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the first one was about what are the protests in Israel and do they have much better? I think we have to be very honest here. The protests in Israel is about the fact that the Netanyahu government is not really bothered about the hostages and are not really bothered about that. And the second thing, of course, is that Netanyahu himself is very unpopular because, at least for Jews in Israel, the degree of resistance to undemocratic means for Jews is stronger than, say, for example, in many other places over here. And there is a great resentment against what this far-right government are doing with regard to undermining the independence of the Israeli judiciary with regard to Jews. The Israeli judiciary is rotten with regard to Palestinians. But that has been much more. And you will notice that Netanyahu has got much more popularity in Israel because of what he's doing in Lebanon and that here. So these protests in Israel are not really pro-Palestinian in any serious way. That is, I think, one thing we have to accept. In the US, of course, it's different. In the US, protests are there, but the US is a very large country, and you have to make a distinction between the political structure and civil society. You have to make distinctions between different states, many of which have outlawed BDS, and different universities. So you have universities like Columbia and others that get a lot of support from Zionist funders and so on, which have cracked down on their students and faculty. And you have other universities in which are much freer and in which you continue to have these protests. And you have Jewish Voices for Peace, as well as other sections are there, which have come out in large-scale demonstrations that have taken place. And a question you have to ask yourself, and then this is also connected to the issue about here in India, is why is it that you have larger demonstrations, mass demonstrations, support of Palestine in Western Europe, in London, and US, and in US and elsewhere, than you have in India? You don't have any real large-scale demonstration in India. And here, that's addressing another question here, which is related here, is why is it that you don't have in India as much as you can? If you look at India, India is a country in which most people are preoccupied with livelihood issues. Although what I've said is that Palestine is something that should recognize how important it is for all of us, it is seen by most people preoccupied with livelihood issues as a foreign policy issue. Even Vietnam was seen like that. All of these things. In this respect, mass movements on foreign policy issues take place in advanced countries, mass movements which are independent of their governments, take place when there is a sizable middle class in which there is significant progressive sections of a liberal, leftist type. And you have institutions that also play a progressive role in civil society. On foreign policy issues in India, you have mass demonstrations if they are led by the left. You don't have the same kind of independent mass movements against Vietnam that you had in the US, which are not led by leftist parties, but all that over there. But here, foreign policy issue must be led by the left. So one question is that the left today, which unfortunately is much weaker than it was, say, 10, 15, 20 years ago, has to take on the responsibility of generating much greater. Expecting middle-class Indians to do that, we have to recognize that as we call the middle class, which is really an upper category in many ways, income as it has become bigger and bigger, it has also politically become more and more reactionary. So there is where the left has to play a much more important role. And of course, like what you are doing on this question of connection with Palestine and funding and all the rest of it, these are things that we must keep on doing. We must keep on acting as some kind of sparks and catalysts, and to generate awareness as much as we can with other people, because all that helps. And the connections that you have with Israel directly and families is particularly important, because even though the amount of aid and all that you give may be small in material terms and so on, it's very, very important for the morale of the people there. It's very important for them to feel, and that gives them some strength, some hope that we have to carry on. I'm part of what's the Indian campaign for the academic and cultural boycott. I'm also part of a group called Indians for Palestine, which is a group that came up after war. And of course, we are also doing this thing, collecting funding, going over there, seeing the connections that we can make and do that. And that remains a very much important part here. And if this is a long-term struggle, concentrate on the youth in India and elsewhere. Yes, yes, don't forget us Buddhas or whatever, but concentrate on them, generate them, because this is a very, very important fight here. I'm concerned about the development of the young today in India, etc. Yeah, so I think that's very, very important here. What can we do with regard to the question of the BDS? The BDS and sanctions. You have BDS is something that the Israeli government and the Zionists are very unhappy about, because this is attacking the legitimacy they want at a very significant scale. It is also having some effect at the material level, when you have, in fact, objections, oppositions, this, that, here. It has had some effect at the diplomatic level, but much more is needed. And you have to have much more sanctions. In India, I would say that what we should be doing, of course, and there is a call in Bangalore and all, for against the arms embargo that India is supporting, the kind of weapons they have. And I would even call on the left to do one more thing, because at least the left is supportive of the BDS in India. It is supportive of the Palestinian cause, to also go one step further. Call for a severing of all relations with settler colonial apartheid Israel. And of course, the Indian government is not going to accept it, but it's the responsibility of the left in particular to now take this stand. And we say that here. When it comes to the question of governments and sanctions, it's trickier. Yes, you have South Africa not doing it, but you know, South Africa continues to supply coal, even though it's played a very positive role in the ICJ and all that. It's supplying coal. You have China and USSR talking about, oh, it's very bad what Israel is doing. But do you think at the governmental level, there's that much going on? They're going to be serious about having sanctions? You know a similarity between India and China? Which is the country that is the number one arms supplier for India and China? Which is the number one arms supplier for India? Russia. Okay? Which is the number two arms supplier for China and India? Israel. India is the number one purchaser of Israel. China is going to take big sanctions. The biggest export destination for Israel's economy is the US. The second biggest export destination for Israel, for its economy, is China. The number one provider of exports to Israel, where it imports from, is China. The number two is USA. You have all this bunch of these class-related governments, etc., that are prepared to do things. But they can, if there's at least some liberal democracy, they can be forced to change and pushed by what happens within their own countries in opposition to that. But yes, there's been material. This is one way to definitely go, and it is part of the larger project of giving up on an offensive military strategy and moving in a strategic sense. I'm not saying, as I said, that you shouldn't use, protect yourself in here, in a strategic sense, towards a non-violent struggle which focuses on the question of apartheid. The arms BDS against apartheid in South Africa was stronger because it was also related to individuals, whereas this BDS by the Palestinians is different from the South African BDS in saying that we are against institutions and we are against those individuals that are part of the institutional structure or whatever. But it is not as thorough as that. And we accept that because there are even Palestinians who say that we have no connection, we are opposed to what is happening, and so on. They're here. But that, of course, it would be very much part of this larger particular strategy. As for the question of the Arab world against Israel, forget about it. The Arab world is not going to be against Israel. It's a question of a struggle within some of the Arab countries that kind of knock to overthrow their dictatorships. Don't think that the Iranian government is doing this. Public in Iran, again, different. Iranian government are great lovers of the Palestinian people. They have also played their own games. They have, I don't know if you know, that in the 1988 war between Iran and Iraq, the US was helping Iraq and the Israelis were helping Iran. And they're both happy to see that over there. So I'm saying that there are all these dimensions that are also taking place here. The question of memory in the construction of identity. The amazing thing in the case of the Palestinians is that their sense of oppression continues from generation to generation because it is continuing. So if you are an oppressed category historically, that certainly consolidates your sense of being an oppressed identity. That definitely does that. And when we talk, and for example, when you're talking about Dalits here or others, that's memory, which is passed on from generation to generation, is of course very, very important. And that plays a role. There's another important aspect, especially today for the Palestinians, with regard to the question of memory and that they have to visit some of the political struggles and arguments of prior Palestinian struggles, which were more secular in character, in many ways, religious and here, to see what they can learn from that. One of the ironies of young radicals today is that they don't think that they have much to learn from the debates and struggles and writings of the past, even within the socialist tradition. Yes, there are completely new issues that we have to take, which were not really dealt with sufficiently seriously, the climate issue, environment, and so on. But insofar as we are anti-capitalist and socialist, let us not assume that everything is new and that there's nothing that we can learn from the struggles and writings and others of people in the past. This applies to the Palestinians, this applies to here. I know it is difficult to believe, but I was young once. And my generation of the 60s and 70s, we were hungry to read Marx, Engels, Lenin, Trotsky, this, that, this, anarchists, this, that, to find out and to make our mind over here. And yes, we recognize that they cannot address many of the things today. But this younger generation is not that bothered about looking and reading that past. And yes, it can learn from it. It can learn from it also. I'm not saying, yes, we are in many ways a failed generation. We thought the revolution is going to come here, but there's still something much to learn. The other aspect about the construction of identities, etc., is that you can also construct very negative identities. And that is also taking place. And I would say something else about identity which might surprise you. Do you know the modern identity which is the most powerful? It is not the religious identity. It's not the even identity of sisterhood or the identity of class, brotherhood, international brotherhood of all workers or sisterhood and all that. It's nationalism. That's why religious extremists try to co-opt nationalism. Islamic caliphate is not going to succeed. In fact, the Islamic world is divided. In Afghanistan, the Islamic tribes and all, they're divided on a tribal case. Whether you're talking about Sunnis or Shias, not just the Sunni-Shia divide, but even among Sunnis, there are divisions, and they're related to nationalism. And one has to try and understand why nationalism seems to have a power that, in fact, other identities do not have. For example, take Hindutva. If the Hindutva lot were to say to Nepal or to say to the Tamils of Sri Lanka, listen, you are Hindus like us, join us in forming a big Akhand Bharat. Forget your Nepaliness or your Tamil Jaffness. You know what the Nepalis will say? I'm a Hindu, I'm very proud of it, but you bloody big brother India, don't tell me that we must give up our Nepaliness. Why? Do you think, I think my point here is that nationalism has an identity, a sense of belonging that is created, which is the most important political imagination. Religion is an imagined community, like Ben Anderson said. But the nation is an imagined political community. The change from previous state forms to the form of the nation state is one in which the nation state is supposed to belong to the people. The second transition that has taken place is from the idea of subjects, hum praja hai, to being nagriks, citizens, and citizens equally. And that sense is a horizontal connection of empowerment and equality between different cities. Of course, in practice, we know there are differences. But that dimension of us being equally citizen, even a dictatorship like Pakistan doesn't say, I belong to the family that is controlling the state. I belong to the Pakistani people. This is given the question of nationalism an important power. But at the same time, nationalism is an identity which is very, very important to move in a progressive direction and becomes a basis for moving. But we cannot solve our problems today on a purely national level. We have to increasingly try to do it at an international level. And that's why solidarity with the Palestinian question, insofar it promotes the idea that we are all universally human and that we can connect internationally, becomes very important, because we are not going to be able to successfully deal with the question of neoliberal capitalism, with the far-right rise of fascistic forces, with the climate question, and all these other questions, inequalities on a global scale, without moving in that direction. So yes, we have to fight on the national question, but we have to fight to move beyond that. And there are two ways in which you can think about nationalism. So I think this question of identity construction, good ways, bad ways. I haven't brought in the question of class, but class is an identity which is different from other identities in many ways. But I won't go into that. You will have to invite me to talk about that some other case. So I'm sure you won't invite me, so leave that aside. But I will just end by saying something about nationalism. There are two ways that we can address the question of nation and nationalism. We can either see nationalism as an inheritance from the past. If we see it as an inheritance of a past, there will always be dispute about what is the proper inheritance and who are the proper inheritors. So in India, Hinduism is the most important inheritance, and we Hindus are the most important inheritors. Or you recognize, and this comes to the question, is that nationalism does not belong to the past, although all nationalisms and all nationality figures and all try to do that. It belongs to the present and future. It will be what we make of it. And that means that we have to fight to construct a much more humane, secular, democratic, and socialist conception of nationalism here. And we have to construct that. And that is an area in which memory is not going to help. Because the nature of even the Indian national movement with its different currents was one which in many ways presaged and actually provided certain level of even support for variant forms and different degrees of what were called Hindu nationalism. So for oppressed nationalities, the continuity of memory is important. For the question of fighting today for progressive causes and all that, the question of how we construct a different understanding today becomes very important. So I think that is the way that I would address the question of memory.
Why is Iran not in a leadership position of Arab world?
Why is Iran not in a?
Position, leadership position of Arab world.
Okay, well, that's very clear in the sense that there has been a, well, first of all, you had a Shah of Iran who was very pro the US. Now you have an Islamic leadership which is stressing the whole importance of expanding an Islamic order, an Islamic world. It's not a country which is itself internally seriously democratic. Why be surprised if this is not a kind of model or an ideal for many of the parts of the world, other parts of the Arab world? What has also happened is that you have had a emergence and change of what was a difference into becoming more and more of a divide. And the US was responsible for this. In Iraq, for example, there were differences between Sunnis and Shias, but there was not a divide. But what has actually happened is that the West and others have now cultivated this. And this has also become important. And this becomes something that even the Sunni Arab world will now begin to use against Iran and vice versa. Apart from the fact that these are regional sub-imperialist powers, like India is a regional sub-imperialist power, which think in realpolitik terms and talk about how we must, if you like, establish our influence in the region. Turkey wants to do it. Saudi Arabia, for the first time, carried out armed invasion in Bahrain and, of course, in Yemen. India is a sub-imperialist power, not just US and others. They want to actually expand their influence. Iran also wants to do that over here. Even the question of Shia-ness is not enough. Two majority Shia states had the second longest war, Iraq and Iran. Now things have changed and you have Iran supporting the Shia regime in Iraq, but there are differences of various kinds that are taking place over here. So don't look to these sub-imperial powers for having some kind of here, and here the class question comes in the sense that the leaderships and governments of these questions are much more concerned about their retaining their dominance and pursuing a politics and an economics that is very lopsided in terms of its distribution of income and wealth. And therefore, don't expect either Saudi Arabia or that here, which is why I pin my hopes on struggles from below.
There is a couple of one question there. Can you hand over the mic? Mic. We'll come back to you. We'll just give that. Your question, we'll come back. We'll come back, sure. Ravi Gar, yeah. 215 minutes.
Yeah, thank you so much, Professor, for that erudite, lecture. So I have a couple of things to, ask, particularly about. Do you think that there will be a rise of the civic society movement within Israel by the Israelis against their own regime? Will that be possible? Will that going to provide another set of solution? Okay. Because they are also suffering due to this, prolonged war. The other one is the leadership. You did mention in your discourse that, the unfortunate part of the Palestinian is that they don't have the leadership as such. So do you also see that there is this self-managed leadership that can happen because of the conditions that are prevailing? So is there a hope that the leadership might rise?
Well,
thank you, sir.
I'll tell you one thing, that in Palestine and in the occupied territories, there is great disillusionment with the Fatah. There is support for Hamas because it is a resistance force, but there's a lot of criticism and they don't want the kind of socio-cultural kind of program or perspective about Hamas. In fact, most people in Palestine are quite secular in so many ways. And this recognition among younger people in Palestine of upsetting and upset is something that is growing. So there is definitely a possibility here. In fact, if there are elections which are supposed to take place because of the China-Proca deal, but there's no timetable, there's no implementation mechanism, Abbas doesn't want it, you will find that Abbas and Fatah will suffer a great deal, which is why Abbas doesn't want to have these elections that are taking place there. You would have, for example, Mustafa Barghouti, whom I met in South Africa, of the Palestinian National Initiative, coming in as an important figure. You have Marwan Barghouti in prison, who is seen as a very, very important figure. So there is a younger generation which recognizes that this has been a failure and it is moving there. With regard to the question of Israel and suffering, actually, they are going to have a lot of problems. Economically, there are going to be very real problems over here. And it will take longer, but it's not as if they're going to escape the kind of difficulties that are taking place within themselves economically and otherwise here. This is a diversion from that. But that's something that one can say that yes, there will be, there is discontent that is growing. There is the democracy that exists for the Jews within Israel being more and more squeezed and weakened, which is going to create greater resentment. And if there is success in, for example, as I said, some Arab country being overthrown, it changes the picture even with regard to the whole question of what can do about the Palestinian cause. And don't forget, of course, the Jewish diaspora and the younger people there that have connections and all, and what they feel. So these are all aspects, but I suspect that that will take a longer time. One question I perhaps omitted was asked about the USSR and the left in India. I've given a partial answer about what I think the left and all should do. Why did the USSR, if you like, take the position it did? This is related to what happened in 1939 in Palestine under the British. 1936-39, that was the conflict that I mentioned. The 1939, when World War II was coming, the British mandate said, oh, no more immigration, restrictions on immigration, and we must get the support of the Arab countries like Iraq, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and here, and therefore they said, okay, no to any partition plan of 1937, because they had talked about a partition there in which there would not be an independent Palestine, but Palestine is part of Jordan. So they did that. And this spurred anger among the Israeli Zionists, a section of which began armed struggle against the British. You may have heard about the assassination in King David Hotel of Bernadette and all that here. That took place. The Soviet Union was impressed by the labor Zionist leadership in many cases, and that section within the Zionist leadership, and thought, that is something. They were impressed by this fight against the British, and they were also, Stalin had his own geopolitical considerations. We should go along with Israel because that will weaken the British, which is the major imperial power and all, and we should promote this development that takes place and all that. So they also moved in that direction here. The question of the Indian left, as compared to all others, it has obviously had a much more honorable role. But there are things that they have done which I would personally not be happy about. So for example, in 2000, you had the visit apart from, of course, the recognition of this thing, you had the visit of Jyoti Basu to Israel. And you had business people going along with him and deals being made. In 2002, you had Somnath Chatterjee going along there. So the left was willing to do deals on irrigation or in relation to its policies with regard to West Bengal and others. I would have preferred to have a much more consistent position with regard to that. But they are the force that at least one has to work with, very much so. And they have the capacity to actually generate this thing here. So that is also there. So you can also see, if you like, this question of realpolitik, and the question of, unlike Balagopal, if you like, not being universally critical of human rights violations, of things, of brutalities that are done not just by the West, but also by the East. I grew up in the 60s And I was something of an early Maoist in thinking that look at what China has done for China, what the Indians have done for India. China is doing much better. But this was in late 60s and early 70s, and I was shocked by the entente between Mao Zedong and Nixon, and what it meant and did. I said, what is going on? And you need to have a much more universalist question for the sake of socialism and for the sake of a much more democratic socialism, and the willingness to criticize whoever does these things. And they are this. We have to make a socialist democracy that is much better than liberal democracy. So all of these things also come into the question of how we have to fight here. So the left also has to be much more self-critical. And that here. So I mean, that is what I was.
Can I ask one more thing?
I don't have any problems. It depends.
Last question, please. The reason is I can't see hungry faces for long, so.
5 countries had decided to recognize Palestine as a state. In the UN, soon after that, there was a resolution passed in the UN demanding the right of Palestinians to a state. So,
well, this
I mean, it was not vetoed. I don't know if it was vetoed, but every resolution on this issue had been vetoed by the US.
That
but this time...
No, this is if it's in the Security Council. That was a General Assembly resolution.
Okay.
So a General Assembly resolution gets passed by a majority. So that was there, and yes, you have certain countries like Norway and others which have said that they're not going to do things, and you've had Colombia and I think Bolivia have severed relations here, which is okay, it's something. But the two-state question is something of a diversion and a cover-up for actually the reality. Do you think, this is my view, there are 700,000 illegal settlers in the occupied territories in East Jerusalem. There would be a civil war in Israel if US told Israel that you must get out and have a genuine two-state solution. It won't happen. And in fact, look at all the governments who talk about two-state but have just kept quiet and done nothing, even as it has been made more and more useless of the idea of that's taking place over there. That's why the question of a new kind of strategy for rights and equality against apartheid, and to leave open the question. The difference is that more and more Palestinians in the occupied are saying, let's move towards a one-state, secular, democratic, but more Jews are totally against that. That's what we have to change over there. But yes, these are important, diplomatic and all, but the larger question is what happens materially on the ground over there here. And can I end with one joke about Indians? Huh? Can I end with one joke?
Yes, yes.
You see, there was a big international meeting on economics. You know, India became neoliberal economics, changed its economic policy in the 90s. There was a big international meeting in Seattle, USA, in which all the international delegates were to come and speak about their economy and all that. And all the delegates were given 15 minutes to speak. So the UK delegate spoke for 15 minutes about the economy, the American delegate, the German, the Japanese, all that. The Indian delegate spoke for 55 minutes. 1 hour, 37 minutes he spoke for about the Indian economy and how great it's changed and all. Then there was a flight of all the international delegates from Seattle to New York, which got hijacked by terrorists. So the terrorists said to all of the people who were sitting there, listen, we will give you one wish and then we are going to shoot you. So the Japanese delegate said, you please give me my sake. Huh? The German delegate said, you please show me the video of Germany winning the Football World Cup. Huh? The British delegate said, you please give me roast beef and Yorkshire pudding. Huh? The Indian delegate said, I would like to make one more speech about India's economic policy. So then the American delegate spoke. He said, listen, you please give me my wish, you please shoot me before he starts.